Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another episode of the Awesome Health Podcast. And we're going to talk about a topic today that I think is so critical, so important, especially at this massive time of uncertainty, and that is regenerative farming. Today, we're going to talk about some of the issues around commercially grown produce, the risk of malnutrition, especially during this period of global isolation, and how important it is to restore your food to its natural state to support living long, living strong, and overall health. Our special guest today is Jennifer Maynard, and she has worked in biotech and pharmaceutical specialty medicine areas for over 20 years. And you're going, wait a minute, what is someone in biotech doing in farming? Well, we're going to tell you what's going to happen and share with you. You see, because after putting a couple 20 years of her passion into changing people's lives in modern medicine, she thought her experience would be better focused as food as medicine. Of course, that was a great Hippocrates, let medicine be your food and food be your medicine. So guess what she did? She switched gears and founded Greater Greens, a regenerative organic farm, as the first step to bringing this movement to front and center to help focus on the root of our health challenges. And of course, you know, we're a big fan of looking at the root causes in living long, living strong, living healthy, living the biologically optimized ways. Now, she also co-founded Nutrition for Longevity, a farm-to-fork meal kitting company that focuses on bringing nutritionally tailored meals to the masses direct from her farm. How cool is that? And she's also an author, and she has Nutrition for Longevity, a team that creates delicious dishes that are tasty as they are nutritious. So whether you're a vegan or a pescatarian, you can get meal plans that provide 3 meals a day and take no longer than 30 minutes to prepare. And the food arrives in sustainable, compostable, that's I got to say that, packaging. Wow. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you've got a lot of things going. Curious. Let's get a little bit of background. How does someone that's inside the biotech and pharmaceutical industry end up running a farm? This is good stuff. And I think 2 things. One, I'm curious about how that story happened. So maybe give us a little background of how you got into that and then why the switch. Second thing is, super commendable that you made such a pivot. You know, obviously to get into the biotech field is not easy. This is hard. You know, this is a tough field, and to make that kind of pivot, how did that happen? Yeah.
So, I mean, I like to think that I kind of went full circle. I grew up and was raised in a farmstead in Alaska, so in a really small remote fishing village, and we pretty much raised all of our own animals, food, everything, and kind of lived with nature, for nature. And then we moved to Southern California, and obviously that was a huge shift from the remote area of Alaska. And
nothing like a little bit of polarity there, right? You went from Alaska to Southern California. Did one day your family just snap? I can't take the snow anymore. Let's go to the beach.
Like, we're so excluded. So a lot of our family lived in Southern California. We have a very large family, and so we just decided we're going to move. We're going to be closer to family. So we were within a few blocks of a lot of our relatives. Very, very tight family. And in the 80s, my uncle actually was diagnosed with HIV and then eventually lost his battle with AIDS. And I was young and really was very involved in his caretaking and kind of seeing how his decline affected him. And that there was really no standard of medicine for that type of specialty illness or specialty medicine area. And I really felt like he suffered more than he should have, and that there was just there was a lot we couldn't do. And I felt really hopeless. And I'm not one to usually feel hopeless. I usually want to be able to do something about it. So I really fell in love with science. What can I do to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else I love, and be really informed and educated so I can help make decisions? And so I was pre-med microbiology, focusing in that area, and biotech arose right when I was in college. Very first company, Amgen, kind of coming, Genentech, all of them were really starting to come to the surface. And I thought maybe this is the solution to modern medicine and solving modern illnesses like this. So I moved into that field, and I worked in specialty medicine and in hematology, oncology, ophthalmology. And I was really passionate about it, and I saw major progress. If you look at where we were in the 80s with HIV and AIDS and where we are today, I just think there's certain illnesses that modern medicine is really essential for and making good progress. But as I moved up into an executive level over the 20 years, you get a broader sense of the industry and how we're affecting overall human health. And that's where I felt like you can't really ignore that, at least in my opinion, what I see from the data, that we're taking steps backwards when it comes to chronic illness. So maybe acute illness, we're making strides forward. Maybe some of these really specialty areas, we're making incredible progress. But if you look at 80% of it, we're really not affecting it in the way we could. And I've always lived very holistically myself with healthy food, active lifestyle. I've always been very active, an athlete in college. And I thought, I'm living this, but so many people are not. And it's hard, and it shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't be hard to eat healthy, but in the US, it's extremely hard. There's so much misinformation out there. And then farming, which I'm really passionate about. I've always, almost my whole life, grown my own food. I thought, why should this not be accessible to more people? And why is our food model so broken? And so what I decided to do is I quit my job completely, and me and my husband, we were living in Switzerland, and we moved back to the US and bought a farm. And the first year, my husband and I completely started the farm from scratch. It was just the two of us. And it was an incredible journey. It was therapeutic. It was, I think, inspiring even for us, and a lot of hard work. And so it gave us this completely different appreciation. It's not that we hadn't farmed, but obviously we scaled it a lot larger. And I think the one key thing with farming is no matter how much you research it and how much you've done it, every year is a new learning experience. And any farmer will tell you that. So you have new challenges every year, especially as an organic farmer. But to go through that was just incredible. And then we said, okay, step 2 was always, how do we create a supply chain that can get that to the masses? So it really was a complete flip back to actually where I believe I came from, which was that more holistic way of living with nature and for nature, and then finding ways to do that for the rest of the population, and really provide better education so people kind of know where is their food coming from, why is it important to grow food in a certain way, how is our current modern farming practices being really destructive, not just for our food, but the environment, and what can we do to bring that whole industry forward. So that's been a big passion of mine, is to be part of moving that industry forward, the farming industry, but also the healthcare industry. And both of those are not sustainable long-term. If you look environmentally, farming is an issue. Also, financially, sustainably, it's an issue. Farmers are one of the highest suicide rate professions in the world. Most people don't know that. It's actually the #1 suicide profession, and most farms are severely in debt. So the whole model is not working. It's not working for the farmers. It's not working for our food model. And then if you look on the healthcare side, with the baby boomer population shifting, we will bankrupt our healthcare system if we don't make dramatic changes. So, I just felt like we need to start, putting our money where our mouth is and start really taking, more aggressive actions towards that. So that's what I did. A big change, but I haven't looked back, and I'm really excited with the momentum we're building and what we've kind of created.
It's an incredible journey from Alaska to Southern California to Switzerland to New Jersey.
And Germany, Germany in there too.
Yeah, I couldn't really think of a much more diverse way to live life and then to be in tech and foods. Talk to me about, you mentioned something that was really important. I think this is something, there's an opportunity that's happening, obviously, with the crises that's going on in the world and all the uncertainty and the shift in technology which is displacing workers and creating all these kind of radical shifts. I'm from a small town in Canada, and what I've noticed is a trend of young and middle-aged people moving to rural areas and starting farms.
Yeah.
And they're buying these old farmhouses that they can get for dirt cheap, and land is cheap, and people like gave up farming 50 years ago, but here's this really great land. And they're coming in, and there's this, I would say, this renaissance and fascination about what it's like to get your hands in the dirt, putting things up, seeing things grow, seeing the challenges that you talk about of organic gardening. Like all of a sudden the blight comes, or you didn't get enough water, or too much water, or they didn't too much sun, not enough sun, or you didn't have the right minerals in the soil, or all these different things that it's like a constant riddle that's evolving all the time. I would like for you to explain for people, because I think there's a lot of people at that crossroads where they're like, hey, you know what, maybe this living in a condo cooped up under these conditions is not the way to live. Maybe there's something, thanks to technology, we can live rurally and not really suffer from, disconnection or lack of professional opportunities. What was that like for you? Like, how did you make the decision to make that transition? Like, at what point did you snap, and what came up for you? Was there fear? Was there excitement? And then all of a sudden you let go of it all. And then you're just like, I got my overalls on, and I got my hat on. I got the old farmer tan. I got my hands in the dirt. The bugs are biting me. What am I doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think, me and my husband, my family talked about it for a while, but we really decided we wanted to fast track it and do it. And I'm one of those people, once I decide on something, it's kind of, there's not a whole lot of convincing me otherwise. So there was like a month time where I just said, this is it. We're going to really scope it out and have this plan. I will say the day I quit my job was a very nerve-wracking day. Walking away from a 20-year career with a plan to become a farmer. Every single person I know, except for one, said, you're out of your mind. What are you doing? You've built this career. You're super successful. But I knew it's what I wanted to do, and I didn't care. And I had one person that I really value as a mentor, and he said, if everyone's saying you're crazy, you're doing the right thing. So keep going. And luckily I listened to that voice a little bit more. Cause we literally packed up, it's not that we didn't plan it out, but we packed up. Within a month we moved. We had already purchased the farm actually from Switzerland. We came once or twice, but we knew it's what we wanted to do. And we had researched it actually for a long time, because we also had integrated aquaponics and some different things like that do take a lot of planning behind them. And I would say after that point, there was no more fear. And, it's always, are we going to have enough money? Is it going to stretch? Are we going to be able to build this business? But I really knew it was going to happen and it was going to move forward. So after that, I would say it was just a matter of laying it out, making sure we hit our timelines, that we did the things that we wanted to achieve, so we could create not just a farm. It was never about a farm, but that we could create a food model that then could be scaled. And because our mission is not just to have our farm in New Jersey, we're scaling now to other farms across the US. And that's where, again, I thought I could bring a lot to the industry, because I was a supply chain person. I spent a lot of time in logistics and operations on scaling and repeatability. And farming is really complicated. Every geography you move to is totally different. The crops are different, but there are enough commonalities that you can create a model that can be scaled. And that's what we've been focusing on. It's not just about growing super biodiverse. We have a very biodiverse farm, so it's a lot of different crops, so it even adds to the complexity. But there's that, but then creating this completely replicable model that we can move into these other regions, and even documenting it into procedures and things like that. So yeah, it was a big change, but I would say I absolutely loved it. It got me back to my roots. It got me outside. I'm now in the office more now, because I'm now running the meal kit side of the business, the overall business. And I hate that part of it. I want to be back on the farm. It's my happy place. Like I go there, I still caretake the bees and do a few things that I haven't quite trained everyone else how to do yet. But that's what I love, you know, the connection to nature and seeing things transform. When you plant a seed in the ground and you see, you know, a live plant less than a month later, it's really rewarding. And, you know, the US was started, 98% of the population was farmers back in, you know, the 1820s. And then now less than 1%, or around 1% are farmers. So we're very disconnected from our food. And I loved that experience of getting reconnected. And I think that's what draws a lot of people, is it's a fascinating process and there's so much going on behind it that just connecting with it is incredible.
Yeah, totally amazing. You brought up a couple things in that I think would be worth touching base on before we get into some of the book stuff and some intricacies of the farming business. And that is, you talked about aquaponics and biodiversity. Now, can you share with our listeners what aquaponics is and maybe why this is perhaps one of the most, for me, one of the more fascinating areas of the farming industry?
Yes. So again, part of my background is I am fascinated with technology, and I do think it's important, and I feel like it's part of why organic farming hasn't moved forward faster with more momentum, is there's been not a lot of innovation in that space. And I think there needs to be, to make it more scalable than it is today. Innovation in a good way, though. It shouldn't be damaging biodiversity. It shouldn't be destroying the soil microbiome and things like that. But we do need to find ways that we can produce good quantities, good quality food for people across the globe. And part of the reason aquaponics was interesting to me is I do think indoor farming does need to be invested in, because we don't know what the future of food's going to look like. Are we really going to run out of soil in 60 seasons like they're predicting because we've damaged our soil too much? My farm shouldn't have a problem because we're building our soil organic matter back, but a lot of farms will. And you see it even in New Jersey. A lot of the farms are having to shift to crops that need less and less nutrients. So New Jersey's big on corn, but if you look at a lot of the regions, they're so depleted now they've moved to soybeans, which are even lower maintenance. And so they're having to literally shift to completely different crops that are the only things their soil can sustain. So you're seeing it even around, like we're seeing it around us. So it's a real issue. And if you look at areas like Dubai, you know, we're discussing things in other regions as well. They can't grow food in a lot of their arid deserts, but they have a huge growing population. So how do you sustain that with sustainable agriculture? So we did a lot of work looking at, okay, what is the most sustainable indoor agriculture that you could do? And I was really fascinated with aquaponics because it creates this small ecosystem within a greenhouse. You can do it outside as well, but it's really beneficial inside. And what it is you're growing fish, and the waste that the fish creates is actually feeding the plants. And then you have also denitrifying bacteria in there that break down that ammonia to something that can be absorbed by the plants, because direct ammonia would burn the plants. And so you have this incredible ecosystem of the fish, healthy bacteria that doesn't hurt humans, and the plants, which are all thriving together because the plants are then filtering that water and it's going back to the fish. So it's, from a water use standpoint, it uses only about 1% of water that a conventional farm would use because it recirculates it. And you're creating fish. We don't sell the fish as a crop, as far as, you know, our pescatarian meals are not with our own fish, but it is a renewable resource in itself that it can also feed people in certain areas. And then for us, the focus is on the plants, but you're creating, you know, if you look at it like a lot of vitamins, they're not as bioavailable for the body. And so you need to have supplements and vitamins that are bioavailable, and they're higher quality, and you then can absorb that as in your human body. And you can do that with a lot of fruits and vegetables, more so than a lot of the pills that you buy that are difficult to absorb. So plants are similar. If you look at a hydroponic system, they're almost overdosing the plants because they're only able to absorb a certain amount of these synthetic chemicals. Whereas aquaponics, it's a much more available nutrient that they're getting from the fish waste. So you see incredible growth, you see really low disease rates. We produce a huge amount of microgreens, herbs, lettuce, greens, tomatoes in our greenhouse, much more than you would outside on a conventional farm. And we can do that year round in New Jersey, which is a nice supplement, obviously.
It's a really
New
amazing.
Jersey can have, some rough weather. So we're investing in that. It's a small, if you look at the overall size of our farm, it's a very small portion of the farm, but the output is massive. And that's one thing that we are looking at, and we're trying to also bring that industry forward, and even looking at areas that it can even bring more value. Like New Jersey, if you want year-round produce, you do need solutions like that. Obviously, places like Dubai, parts of Africa, it's even more value because they really can't grow much of anything outside in a lot of these regions. So I thought it was a really important part. It's something that I feel is important to move agriculture forward. The majority of the farm is a biodiverse regenerative farm. So we're using all practices to rebuild the soil and the soil microbiome. We've built up the US on average used to have 11% soil organic matter in our soil, which is part of what builds up those nutrients. It's like a sponge, and it holds in water. So every 1% of soil organic matter, you can hold about 170,000 gallons more water per acre. So if you think about areas like California, areas of drought, we could solve a lot of our food problems by just building up our soil organic matter. And it takes time, but it's not unsurmountable amounts of time. Every year you can build up about 1 to 1.5% soil organic matter if you use optimal practices to do that. And then if you look at the carbon store portion of it, which is the environmental, if you look at the meta studies they've done at the United Nations and different organizations, farming is the least costly, most effective way that we can start reversing climate change very quickly. And that's because soil is essentially a huge carbon store. We've lost 2/3 of it into the atmosphere. So it again is like a big sponge that we can just pull carbon back into the soil from the atmosphere and start reversing climate change with the right practices. So that's all about building up that organic matter, which builds up soil structure, and it allows that sponge to start holding in water. It allows it to start creating an environment that microorganisms can thrive. And then the biodiversity of the farm is really important because plants pass down a portion of their holobiome, and we can talk about holobiome in a minute, but they pass down a portion of their holobiome in their seed, which is really important because they can literally pass down hundreds of thousands, millions of years of genetics, essentially, of their holobiome in their seed. But the rest of it, they actually are selecting from their environment. And if you have monocrops and you've used a lot of chemicals, you've damaged a lot of that soil microbiome. So the plants have less of that diversity that they can pull into their system. And, the holobiome to me is really fascinating, both on the human side and the plant side, because again, it's this holistic view of looking at farming and looking at the plant and looking at the soil and how it all works together. So we focus on that really heavily, both in the aquaponics side of things and the outside, more bio-intensive, regenerative side of farming as well.
So talk about, I've never heard that term before. Holobiome.
Okay.
Is that H-O? Can you spell that for us so we can put it in the show notes? Make sure
God. Holobiome.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure if it was a W or an H. So tell us about the holobiome. What is that? And what is it?
So the holobiome, if you take anything away from this discussion, the holobiome is probably one of the most fascinating things, and it's what has been, even from the beginning for me, it was about the microbiology, and I've always been fascinated with the microbiome. But the holobiome is a concept a lot of people have never heard before, and I'll start with the plants, and then I'll connect it to why it's important for humans. So plants have this holobiome, and it's the collective DNA and RNA of not just the plant, but all of the organisms surrounding it. So there's an air microbiome, for example. So plants have about a foot around them organisms that are actually encircling that plant, and they're actually communicating with the plant. And then there's 5 different microbiomes in the plant itself. The one we focus on the most is the part around the soil microbiome, which is called the rhizosphere microbiome. And that's where the main organisms within the soil microbiome are interacting with the plant. And you have to think of the rhizosphere microbiome as the immune system of a plant. It's communicating with its environment, and literally its microbiome is sending its signals on how to respond to stress that is either coming or already impacting the plant. So for example, if there's a drought condition, it may have organisms that it passed down in their seed that have been through drought before, and they're already communicating to the plant, you need to send out finer root fibers, you need to actually send deeper roots down so you can actually absorb more water and survive this drought because your ancestral plant survived it and this is how they did it. And if you think about that, biodiversity then of the soil microbiome is incredibly important because it's a stress coping mechanism of the plant. It's essential to survival. And we're literally killing it with a lot of our modern farming practices. So the holobiome, you got to think of it as this entire network. More than 50% of the cells associated with the plant are non-plant cells, similar to the human body. And they're helping it thrive if you allow it to. So if you create the right environment. So we have to stop thinking of things as these individual units, but as these complex systems that are communicating in this incredible way. And what a lot of people are surprised about is to find out that that holobiome is actually affecting the plant at a genetic level. It's actually affecting the way it's expressing its DNA. And
would that be similar to human epigenetic response?
Yes, exactly. It's epigenetics in plants. So it's very similar. And if you look at how plants do it, it's examples like the root fibers that I was talking about. That is a way of a plant expressing its genetics in a different way. But also things like the amount of phytonutrients it generates. So phytonutrients are the chemicals that plants are generating to respond to stress, usually. And so, for example, maybe it's being attacked by an aphid. It'll produce these chemicals to create maybe a more bitter flavor that will deter that insect. And a lot of these are associated with pigments. So blueberries, just because it's common, I'm going to give it as an example, is really high in anthocyanins. It's what gives it that beautiful blue color, and it's also one of the highest phytonutrients, or it's also associated with as an antioxidant. But it's incredibly beneficial to the human, even though it's created by the plant as a protective mechanism. And bitter foods, even though they're not as common in our diet, we try to incorporate them in our diet because they're extremely healthy for your microbiome and your gut. But we've kind of taken them out of our palate. But they're, again, a lot of those phytochemicals that are really healthy for your body. And they can actually encourage the same stress coping mechanisms in the human body as well, which is why there's all this craze about phytonutrients and why they're so important in eating the rainbow. That's because it's actually promoting those same stress coping mechanisms in the human body as they do in the plants. So the holobiome is really important, and that's where we focus so much on trying to create healthy soil, and why it's really frightening what's happening with our current farming practices, because we're damaging a lot of that soil, we're damaging a lot of the biodiversity, and we only understand about 1% of it. So if you look at what we understand about the human holobiome and the human body, you know, the soil equivalent of that is we understand about the big toe worth of what's going on under our feet. And we have to start understanding it more. And before we, you know, decimate it, we got to understand that it's heavily connected to human health as well. So that's where we kind of are focusing so heavily on the regenerative practices, using compost, keeping the ground covered, using hedgerows, anything we can do to build up that biodiversity. So we have this incredibly healthy soil that then feeds our plants and creates incredibly healthy plants that then translate over to feeding a healthy human. And so, yeah, it's extremely fascinating. And I think it's something I would love people to take away and start understanding that things are so much bigger than just the plant and what you look at. There's so much more around the plant that makes up what it is.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
I think that you bring up a really good topic. I remember years ago, I read a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi, and inside that, the title of the author, Yogananda, was meeting with an Indian scientist by the name of J.C. Bose. And J.C. Bose had developed a device called the cresograph, and the cresograph actually could measure, it amplified the energy systems of a plant. So a plant had feelings, it had a nervous system, it had a response, it had a circulatory system, just like humans, just at a microscopic level. So he had to amplify this and he could see it. And he did all these experiments, which he documented in the book, you know, when Yogananda went to see him. And then years later, in California, when Yogananda was in California, he dealt with the famous Luther Burbank, and they developed a friendship. And what was fascinating about that story, talking about this holobiome, is that Luther Burbank, who is famous for splicing different types of food to make better foods, but he was able to grow a cactus without spines. And through talking to the plant over a period of years and convincing it that it didn't need spines and corrected, and he did it, and he gave strips of that plant to Yogananda, and I've actually seen the spineless cactus on the grounds in California. And why I'm saying that is because here is definitive evidence, like 100 years ago, that people who were integrated in the farming, and as you get your hands in the soil and you get them, and you're in this, you start to pick up the energy and communication and awareness of plants and their responses, and you get tuned into it. And we've lost that, like you said, 98%, way back at the turn of the century, we're on farms, and now less than 1%. And now it's industrialized, it's commercial, there's tractors, there's giant sprayers. You're not really connected to it in that. And then here you are telling me that the latest science is telling me that there's this holobiome and it's interacting with their seed and they're like, this is like, boom. This is really critical components, and why this information needs to get out to people, why people want to start growing their own gardens and experiencing these things and learning about this. How the heck can anybody learn about all this stuff? Like, how did you get started? Like, how are you in pharmaceutical biotech and all of a sudden you switched over and put your overalls on and now you're talking about the holobiome? Like, do you think the whole period of the tech career kind of give you insight that you can now apply in this area? Or was it something that just came organically from being in that environment?
I think it's both. I do think I look at things from a very scientific, lens, but I think you have to have that creative side to go a little bit beyond that. Like, I'm not one of those people that only believes in what's in a book. And I think that's what I love about the longevity diet, and we can get into that in a minute, is it started actually with people that already understood it. Maybe not all the scientific proof behind it, but they understood what worked inherently, passed down generation to generation. And then Dr. Walter Longo researched why, and then he proved it with the science. And that's what I like about the holobiome, is only did we start understanding this when the Human Genome Project happened, and then they realized we have this whole human microbiome, and then they realized we have this holobiome, which is mind-blowing to a lot of people, that we also have about a foot around us of bacteria, like encircling us, that are actually making critical decisions of how we gauge other people and interact with even other human beings and other animals and the smells that we like. You know, they're literally making decisions, and we're just starting to understand that. So then we started understanding about the human body, and a lot of scientists said, well, this is really fascinating. How similar are plants? Like you said, 100 years ago, already people were looking at that, but now they have, you know, the ability to actually sequence that and look at how much diversity is now associated with that plant that are non-plant cells, and going, holy cow, these are impacting all these metabolic pathways. These are impacting these genetic expressions. Like, this is so much more complex than we ever understood. So for me, it's just fascinating. And because I'm fascinated by it, it just draws me into it. And then the more you understand it, the more you realize why, like for us, our organic farm is thriving. And we had a lot of farms around us that had massive flooding last year. They had huge amounts of powdery mildew and different issues, and they were spraying like crazy. I even had one of the conventional farmers come over and go, I wish I had been organic. I spent 10 grand on chemicals and I still lost my whole crop. And you guys are over here like digging in the soil and all your stuff looks great. But, you know, we are building up that resilience and that stress resistance. And when you start to see it, and also some of our plants are really stronger in flavor. People are like, I haven't tasted something this flavorful. Your asparagus is amazing, or this is amazing. And it's those phytonutrients, and it's actually having nutrient-rich produce that isn't picked early for shipping logistics reasons and gassed at, you know, a local location. And, you know, it's not grown using chemical fertilizers, but we're building up the soil to be able to give those nutrients by themselves. So I think part of it was just this fascination with it and wanting to understand it, but then seeing it and going, okay, this makes sense. I want to learn more. And I think there's just more available than there was before. I mean, this is a really new field. Only in the last 5 years did you ever hear Holobiome, and it's only just starting to get researched. And there's so much more that's coming. It's just a really incredible field. And I think it's important to start making that connection also scientifically, because some people don't believe it until they see it as proven fact. And there's so much debate out there. Is plant-based eating healthy? Is this healthy? I think the proof behind it then stops the debate, and then we start focusing on the right things. So that's what I think is important about proving it with science, is it stops the debate, everyone comes on board, and then we can actually progress as a farming community, as a healthcare community.
Before we get into longevity, I want to tie up one loose end on this, and that is you're bringing stuff from farm to fork, because you were talked about the difference in the flavor and, you know, the taste and the nutrient quality and stuff. So how are you doing that now, and maybe what is the expansion plan? Because obviously you're talking about scaling and stuff. Because can you explain that whole process, why that's important and why that's been successful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my passions, like I said, was to start the farm first. I was always adamant that I wanted to address some of the challenges in the food industry, and one of them is logistics. A lot of my background's in operations and logistics and compliance. And it is a challenge with food. How do you get food ultra fresh to people's doors, essentially, or to a farmer's market or whatever, at its peak ripeness, and not have it already degrading its nutrients, you know, too quickly? And it is complicated. And so I thought, you know, if I manage the farm and I manage the meal kitting operation, I cut out the middlemen, which is time and money. And so we can make this more affordable, and we can do it faster. So we literally, in our planning, confirm orders 24 hours before. The farm gets their plan, they harvest that next morning, and we're already kitting that meal and shipping it out. So we literally kind of joke that it's like lightning speed, but we made sure all of our logistics were, like, our warehouse where we do the kitting is only 10 minutes from the farm. And we pick our farms for a very specific reason. You know, we do what we call farming on the fringe. We always are on the outskirts of a major metropolitan area. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's also for soil fertility reasons. We built our cities on top of the most fertile soil in our country, which is how we
really wild.
Yeah, right? And the problem is with urban sprawl, we just keep pushing the farms out on less and less and less fertile soil. So we're really adamant of where we pick our farms to begin with, because even though the soil may not be perfect, we can get it to its optimal, and it's already got the potential. So there's a lot of reasons why we set up our logistics the way we do, but we make sure it's right next to each other and that we have really clear communications that we can get it there as quickly as possible. Not everything, obviously, right? We don't produce grain on our farms. So if we're getting rice, we are buying that from a supplier. We make sure it's also organic and regeneratively grown. But we specialize in vegetable production, biodiverse vegetable production. So some of our stuff, our coffee, our olive oil, we get from very, very special places that it is grown in the most sustainable ways. But the produce is what we focus on, and that's what we try to get as fresh as possible, because most produce, like a tomato in an average grocery store, is 6 weeks old by the time you get it, and it was picked totally green. This used to blow me away, because we grew up around some farms even in Southern California, and we knew them really well, and they'd say, if you guys want to make pasta sauce, you can go and help yourself to the tomatoes that are left in the field. And you'd go out there and it's just loaded with red tomatoes, and I was like, what's wrong with all these? They're like, they're too ripe. So the best, most prime tomatoes are the ones they leave and they just end up like tilling them in, and we're like filling the bed of our truck. Wow. Like, we can make so much pasta sauce with this. And coming from Alaska, you never waste anything. So we're just like, oh my gosh, this is so much waste. But that's what we wanted to change, because obviously if you're not letting a plant get to its ripest stage, it's probably not at its best nutrient levels. And then obviously once you pick that, it's starting to degrade. So we want it to be as fresh as possible, still with its peak nutrients. And again, people can taste it. You can tell the difference. We have people say this is like the way it used to taste when my grandma got stuff out of her garden when I was a kid. And that's what we want. And I mean, I encourage people, if you can grow your own food, do that first. Don't buy my food. Like I encourage everyone, grow some herbs on your windowsill if you can, not just because it's fresh and healthy, but you're connecting with that plant. It's so important to connect with plants. We've lost so much connection to our food just to smell and get your salivary glands going. Like, there's a whole pre-digestion that happens that we don't even allow to happen anymore. And if you look even at the primitive side of humans, we used to be able to really, under stress, even select what crops we needed by the smell, by the color, because of the phytonutrients. So when you're under stress, you actually see a narrowed spectrum of color that should attract you to bright red and bright blue things, like blueberries and acai berries and the things that are super high in phytonutrients. And, now we have red food coloring that dyes, these heart-shaped cookies, and we don't even know, our bodies don't even know what that is anymore. And so we really want people to reconnect and smell and taste and touch what real produce is, so your body can reconnect and start to learn what it needs again. Because I do believe the body...
Turn on some of those epigenetic components that are lying dormant within our skills. Because there is an activation. As soon as you start growing something, there's some kind of thing that shifts in your awareness and your consciousness. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Well, they're actually doing studies now that it's not even just about the plant, it's about the soil. They're doing studies of direct soil microbiomes with people with PTSD, that it actually is triggering stress coping mechanisms just because of what's in the soil. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting everyone eat dirt, but I mean, there is something about getting your hands dirty and having your kids play in the dirt, because there is beneficial things. There's also ones you got to watch out for, but there's a lot of beneficial organisms in there. And that's, again, this holobiome concept, that there's a lot more going on around us than we realize every single second of every single day. So, yeah.
I have a friend who is a very successful theoretical physicist and inventor. And he spent 20 years planting trees. And he said to me one time, he said, almost all of my best ideas happen when my hands are in the soil. There's some sort of activation where my hands are in the soil, that I get these information components. Yep. And he talked about that. And then I've heard this in many of the First Nations population talking about, they would refer to the spirits or these connections. And it's just a way of languaging something that we can actually experience when we're connected to our food and to our soil. And I've experienced it on a small degree to myself.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the longevity diet, because we're going to switch gears a little bit. I see the book in your background there. And I think William, or I think it was a Professor Oshansky in the New England Journal of Medicine about 10 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, reported that the disability adjusted life expectancy for humans has now down about 60 years old in North America. And what that means is that you are going to be with some chronic medical condition or something that compromises your life for the rest of your life. Yes. You're on prescriptions, whatever. And and what was interesting is he was forced to curtail his other conclusions. And that was that the life expectancy for Americans was actually dropping due to the negative side effects of the industrialization and technologification of society, for lack of a better word. I don't even know that's a word.
Yeah.
And he had to curtail that. And now over the last few years, we've actually seen a drop. Oftentimes the opioid crisis and addiction to drugs and chemicals that are supposed to help us over things are now driving down life expectancy. What have you found and are sharing in your book, The Longevity Diet, and why is that so important in regards to living long, but also that what's called the health span? The health span is maybe we can't live longer overall, as maybe there's genetic limits or whatever, but what is the quality of life?
Yeah. So I think, so the book was actually written by Dr. Walter Longo. He's a leading scientist in the longevity region. He's who we collaborated with to start Nutrition for Longevity, because I was absolutely fascinated with the research that he did, and that he started looking at people, like I said, that already seemed to inherently understand and pass it down generation to generation. So he went to these longevity regions, like Sardinia, Italy, Calabria, Italy.
Blue zones, like the blue zones?
Yeah, exactly. And he said, okay, what is it about these places that is making it work? So he researched everything he could about their overall lifestyle, not just the food, but their overall lifestyle. And he found from a food standpoint, or related to food, two really key insights that I think have changed the perspective of longevity dramatically. And then after he found those two things, he dug into it at pretty much the most scientific clinical level that you could to prove why it was working. And he really started identifying the exact longevity genes that were allowing these areas to thrive and why. So he found two things. One is he found exact kind of macro ratios and similarities between every single region and how they ate, so their feeding habits. And then he found that they also had fasting habits, every single one of them. That was really something that they passed down either from religious reasons, holidays, whatever. They had passed these down. And so he started trying to understand, basically they practice circadian rhythm, intermittent fasting every single day. So their bodies are on this incredible rhythm. And we don't allow that in the US. We literally have access to food and entertainment 24/7. So we never are letting our bodies have, your cortisol spike throughout the day and then it wind down and your melatonin going up. We don't get into that rhythm, so we don't have great sleep. We have a lot of weight gain because our bodies never have that time that they can decompress and work on cellular regeneration instead of still digesting food and all these other things. So we don't let our bodies get in this rhythm, and they do. And then they usually a few times a year do a prolonged fast, whether it's a water fast. He's designed a diet that you can still have some level of food, so it's a very controlled, simulated, prolonged fast, as he calls it. And that's where they saw the biggest cellular regeneration. So these places, again, may have done it for religious reasons, but they do these prolonged fasts, which mainly means beyond 3 days, which is when your body really goes into deep ketosis. And that's where you have, that's when your cells start to clean themselves up, right? If you look at your DNA, it's like a rope, and it starts to unravel on the ends the more you beat it up. And trust me, with all our environmental toxins and the way we stress our bodies out, it's unraveling on the ends. And so what happens when we trigger our longevity genes is they go in and they say, that can be fixed, let's repair it. That can't be fixed, we need to just tear it apart and start all over again. And so it does that, and it goes through and does the cleanup, and then you see this huge boost in your cellular regeneration. And so that's what prolonged fasting does. And then the food side, I think there's two key things that people need to really understand about the American diet is we're overdosing ourselves on protein. We eat about 50 grams more protein on average a day in the US than we actually need, and that's recommended, even though it's a huge concern for people. Am I getting enough protein? And it is important to get good, clean, healthy protein. It's absolutely essential. It's the building block of your DNA, but it's also essential that you're not overdoing it with especially unhealthy meats. And then sugar, refined sugars. We also eat about 50 grams more a day than we need of sugar. And that's about 58 pounds a year of sugar that we're putting in our bodies. And what's crazy about those two things is both of them trigger an acceleration of your aging. So they actually trigger aging genes. So the fasting and eating certain foods high in phytonutrients can actually slow down and trigger your anti-aging genes and this cellular repair. But then you have foods that are actually accelerating it. And the thing with sugar is not only is it accelerating these aging genes that we now know for sure scientifically are creating aging and cellular damage, but it also blocks different factors that would help with oxidation. So all of your antioxidant type of activity that's happening in your body, you're actually shutting that down. So what he did is looked at, they're eating a mainly plant-based diet. Only 1 in 10 Americans are even eating the recommended amounts of fruits and vegetables in the US. They're eating way more than even that. So probably if 1 in 10 are eating our 5 to 6 servings, they're eating closer to 10. So they're getting a lot of fiber. They're getting a lot of natural phytonutrients into their bodies. And then they're practicing intermittent fasting daily and then prolonged fasting. And so what he did is he even took that to a whole nother level and said, okay, what is aging in the human body and what is health span? Because it's not just about living longer, it's about living healthy longer. So he wanted to change that perspective and say, how do we improve our health span where we're living at our prime longer? So we're mobile, we have great cognitive ability. And he realized these same things were linked to that as well. So a lot of his research started focusing on chronic illness and how can feeding and fasting regimens also impact chronic illness and even the reversal of chronic illness, which is what impacts our health span. So it's fascinating. I recommend anyone, and if your listeners are interested, we can also get them the Longevity Diet book. I don't like to ever use the word diet because people think it's a short-term thing. The book is really about a lifestyle program that you can live your whole life by. And it gives all the pillars of longevity and the different things you can do to support, improving your health span or giving yourself the best chance you possibly can.
So yeah, let's talk about that. That is a great way to kind of go. We've gone from the farm kind of to the concepts, but let's talk about an area that I think is really interesting, which is nutrition for longevity. This is kind of like the end, if I understand, this is kind of like the end product of your mission is kind of. So I think let's talk about nutrition for longevity and what you're doing to support that for people that they're like, yeah, I want to live long. I want to live strong. Or I know that I haven't been eating a proper diet. I don't know anything about farming. I live in the city. I'm 65 years old. I remember back in the day when I was a kid and had a farm, and now I'm here locked in this kind of, standing in line at Costco for 2 hours. What is nutrition for longevity, and how are you supporting people in that journey?
Okay, so nutrition for longevity kind of has two focuses. It's mainly, if you look at it just from the outside, it's a meal kit company. So we take that healthy food we grow on the farm, we curate it into a way that it's an exact macronutrient level. So every single component and every single meal and every single day is very prescriptive. So we give exact calorie ranges, we give exact macros. So, you know, every day you're getting that same macro that somebody in Okinawa, Japan would be eating. And that was a key part of the diet. That's really important, is that you're getting the right amount of protein, you're getting the right amount of carbohydrates, you're getting the right amount of fiber, you're getting the right amount of sugar. It doesn't have refined sugars in it. So it's very void of additives, preservatives, refined sugars. And that was interesting to me. It's also what drove me to make this change. Is I lived in Germany for 3 years and Switzerland for 3 years. And they don't have a lot of in fact, it's definitely tighter regulated than here, and there's just different expectations by people that live in those countries. But there's almost no preservatives, additives, very little processed food. When you go into a grocery store there, it was actually almost comical, but I also kind of wanted to cry when I first moved to Germany, because you'd go in the grocery store, it's almost all produce and fresh items, and then there's very small sections that have, you know, small amounts of processed food. And it's growing. They're adopting all the same stuff over there too, because it changed immensely over the last 10 years of being in Germany and then in Switzerland. And but it was amazing how hardly anything had added sugar. Like when you go there and you have ketchup, in the US, it's so ubiquitous, you don't realize that there's sugar in everything, in your condiments, in your beverages, and it's just kind of hidden in there. You don't think about it. So when you go have ketchup there, my kids were like, "What is this?" And I was like, "It's ketchup." And they're like, "No, it's not." And it's basically tomato paste. There's no sugar whatsoever in it. And it doesn't taste like American ketchup at all. And you realize it's just because it's 2 ingredients. And here there's an added 3 or 4 ingredients or more. And so you start realizing that there's other parts that are already eating this clean way without all the preservatives and the additives. And then when you come back, it's shocking. You taste the chemicals in the food. You can tell the difference, and you don't really want to go back once you've been in that kind of an environment. So we wanted to make that more of a standard that could be available to people. So it doesn't have all those additives. It's as raw and as little processed as possible, so you get the most of those nutrients. And then it's in those exact ratios, so you don't have to think about it. So it's for people that have a busy lifestyle. They either don't have access. Like we have people that write us letters and they say, "Look, I don't even have access to this food. Even if I did not, like if I knew how to cook it, I just don't have this in my area. I don't have this kind of fresh produce." And so we kind of solve that problem, but we make it easier for people so they don't have to do all the planning and the thinking and trying to get the diet right. And we have, you know, we're launching the whole spectrum. So we're launching in a few weeks, just a produce box for people that are like, "I got this. I know what kind of macros I need. I just want clean food." And then we have our meal kits, which the lunch and breakfast are pretty much ready. The dinner you have to prepare, but it's all pre-portioned for you. And then in about 2 months, we're launching into ready-made, because we've got a lot of people say, "I really want to eat like this, but you know, I work 14, 16-hour days, and I want to be able to heat it in my oven and be done." So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. And we're even moving into more of medically tailored areas where we can even cater to certain groups. Like we launched about a month ago a type 2 diabetes, or a diabetes friendly meal kit that can support people with diabetes to eat a healthy meal as well. And we're working on some really exciting stuff that we'll launch later this year in other areas of chronic illness that we're trying to have an impact on. So it's not just the food for us. It's like, I don't feel like I've left healthcare. I feel like I'm just taking a different approach to it. So I still believe, you know, we look at food, people that are really knowledgeable about food, they look at it as prevention. I'm going to eat healthy so I don't ever age, and I'm going to eat healthy so I never get this disease. But the fact is, we have a lot of chronic illness in the US. And I think we have to change the discussion. It's not just prevention. We have to make food an intervention as well. It should be treated like your first intervention. If somebody has a chronic illness, first try to treat it with food. It's the lowest cost, and it's, in my opinion, one of the most effective. And first treat it with that, and then go after the modern medicine when it's absolutely needed. You know, 80% of chronic illness, they do believe, can be adjusted by lifestyle changes. It's not just food, there's other things too. And again, those are outlined in the book. Active lifestyle is important. Even meditation and, you know, trying to reduce the stress in your life and things like that. But food is a key pivotal part of it. And we're so far from where we need to be. And it's not just the US, but unfortunately even the longevity regions, when you talk to, you know, multiple generations there, it's funny, if you go to like Nicoya, Costa Rica, you meet someone, you're talking to them, and they're like, you got to meet my dad. He'll tell you about all this stuff. And then you meet the dad, and then the dad's like, you got to meet my dad. And so you're literally sitting down with these multi-generations, but they're the most, I think, crushing thing is they're all telling you stories about how their children and their children's children won't have that health span because they're not adopting these same practices. So there's a lot changing. We're trying to be part of the solution, reversing it and bringing that longevity not only back to the longevity regions, but into the US and even globally, so people can make the right choices and that we can make it easier. That, you know, I've had a few doctors tell me, you know, when you walk into a grocery store, you have 90% of your decisions are bad decisions. Like, we got to change that. We got to make it easier that, you know, 10% of your decisions are bad decisions, and you knowingly say, I want that chocolate cake. I don't care. I'm going to eat it anyway, but I know the consequences and I'm doing it because I'm going to splurge. And that's okay. Like, I tell people, it's okay to like splurge now and then. I'm actually one of those people that believes you kind of got to shock your body every once in a while, but you should know that those are the choices you're making. And right now, when 90% are bad choices and that's kind of all that's in front of you, that's kind of rough. And, you know, I'll see people that are overweight or they're struggling with something in the grocery store, and I'll see what they're putting on their conveyor belt, and they're trying really hard. You can tell it's low fat this, it's fat free, that, you know, they're working really hard to try to turn things around. I don't think it's a lack of desire, but there's just so much manipulation and misinformation out there that people just don't know where to go. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to also provide a lot of education so people don't have to buy our food to do this. Like, the whole thing's lined out in the longevity diet. We even give the book for people that are really interested. So it's about really trying to create this movement with changing our food system, changing our health system, looking at food truly as medicine. I mean, you look at how long ago did Hippocrates live, and he understood it all the way back then. And we need to actually get back to that, right? Because that's the foundation, is food as medicine, and we've kind of lost focus with that.
Beautifully said, well illustrated, and super interesting. Can you share with people where they can reach you, how they get a hold of you, how do they get access to your products, your services? Do you have any information channels or things that you're putting out? Please let us know, because I know there's going to be a ton of people that are very interested in this. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you can go to nutritionforlongevity.com. That's our website, and you can get more information about it. We do also, if you're on the East Coast, after things settle a little bit with COVID-19, we even do events on the farm. We're really passionate about educating people and letting them connect with how their food's grown, seeing the aquaponics, seeing the regenerative farm. So if you're on the East Coast and you happen to be in the New Jersey area, we do book those up pretty quick, but we offer them to the public. And we'll start posting schedules once we start events again. This year, obviously, it's been a little bit of a different year. But once we are in a place that we can do that, we'll start doing that again. We share a lot on our social media. You can just look up Nutrition for Longevity. We'll pop up there because we like to share stories about the farm and you know, the progression throughout the year and what it looks like. And then just a lot of nutrition information. We give recipes out. We do cooking demos. So again, it's we're not just about selling our food. I mean, obviously it's a business, but we're very much about education as well. And the longevity diet book, you know, I can provide you some information to share with your audience, but it's a great resource. It's for somebody that's a science geek like me, it goes all the way into the clinical data. You know, some people really want to see that, and it's exciting, but there's also a really great story behind it. So, you know, it's a little bit like a novel and then a little bit like a scientific journal. So it's a great book, and it has recipes in it. It's got the whole kind of protocol. So you can have the whole gamut. You can go to us if you need everything kind of done for you, and you can do a lot of it yourself. Either way, we just want people to thrive, and we do want to see this improvement in health span. And like I said before, I think it's essential. We're going to bankrupt our healthcare system if we don't make major changes, and our food and farming system is very broken as well. So
we're just trying to do our part to bring that forward and hopefully get more farmers out there and more people doing these practices.
One final question before we go. How do you see the future of food and how that's going to contribute to humanity, say, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years from now? What is your vision for the future, and what would you like to see happen based on everything that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. I think one is, and I don't try to push my beliefs on anyone, but I do think we will have a lot more plant-based eating, partly because there's more mimicking foods out there, partly because I just think there's so much more awareness on the environmental effects and even some of the health effects of eating too much meat. So I think more of a plant-based lifestyle. We talk about reducitarian, so I don't try to, my husband, I give the example of my husband. When we met, if it didn't have a slab of meat, it was not a meal. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day had meat, and he's reducitarian. So maybe 2 days a week he eats meat now. And that's a big change for him. And if you look at his environmental impact of that change, it's massive. So, 80% of our farmland is focused on producing meat. People say you can't feed the world with organic farming. We absolutely can if we just make some lifestyle changes. So I do think not only will that happen because people will do it by choice, I think it will happen because we have to make it happen. It's just not environmentally sustainable. So I think that's one shift that I would like to see, and it already is happening very quickly. There's people predicting in 20 years there will be almost no meat. I don't know that it'll happen that fast, but I think that'll be a trend. And like I said, I think if people I like to tell people to try to flip things around. When you go to a restaurant right now, how do you order your food? You order an entree, which is usually a huge slab of meat, and then you order sides, which are usually a tiny bit of vegetables. I just encourage people, at a minimum, flip that around. Your entree should be this gorgeous plating of all these incredible fresh fruits and vegetables, and then a little bit of meat if you're going to eat meat or fish. Or you can get that from beans. You can get all the sources of protein you need from plant-based sources as well. So I think that's one. I think the other is, and I'm already seeing this momentum, and we're really keen on being part of it, and we're trying to actually be a leader in it, is the food as medicine movement. And it is happening, and it's going to be much more prominent in the coming years, where food will be one of the first interventions. You even see already some insurance companies starting to prescribe fruits and vegetables to the elderly population. It's going to become a common thing, and it's going to become ubiquitous, partly because it's the least costly solution environmentally and for our health, and it works. So we're starting to now scientifically prove that. That's why this book is so important behind me, is it's one of the first major efforts to scientifically prove how food can impact disease. And we're going to do more of that. We're definitely not slowing down anytime soon. So I think those are the two biggest things I see changing in food. And then obviously how we grow our food is a key component of that. We're seeing a major, like you said, resurgence of people really interested in farming. Like, a lot of people on my farm have master's degree. I don't know what everyone's concept of a farmer is, but I can tell by when I told people I was leaving my career to become a farmer, it wasn't seen as the most positive thing. But most of my farm team are young, they're highly educated, they do it because they choose to do it, and they love what they do, and they're passionate about it. So I think you have this totally different approach to farming. Like, we also pay our farmers benefits, and I think things like that are what are changing, that, people do that by choice, and they get well compensated for it, because I think that's important. So I think our food system will also change dramatically, of how our food is grown.
What an enlightening interview on the farming practices, Greater Greens, Holobiome, why that's so important. So as the founder of Greater Greens and also the founder of Nutrition for Longevity, Jennifer Maynard, you are a gem. Thank you so much for your service to humanity and for taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule to share with our listeners at Bioptimizers and the Awesome Health Podcast Show, so that they can hear and find out and go to more. So for folks, if you enjoyed this interview, we only touched the surface. I can tell that Jennifer is a wealth of knowledge. Check in with her social media sites. All the links and references will be here in the show notes. Go out to the farm, schedule an event, get out there and see what it's like. Get your hands in the dirt, see all these things in action, and you might be surprised. You might end up on your own farm one day yourself. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, Jennifer. Hopefully we'll get to have you back sometime and tell us more insights from what you're doing in the kind of cutting edge of organic farming.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.